We may nearly be done with the core Ratchet & Clank games, but that doesn't mean we're done with the characters. Ah, no. Both characters and their equipment have appeared in games outside of their own. I thought it'd be fun to take a look at some of these guest appearances before we move on. First up, Ape Escape. This PS2 franchise centers around running around and collecting monkeys, and it paid homage to our two heroes with one such simian in the third game, cunningly titled Ape Escape 3, who just happens to be dressed up like the dynamic duo, right down to having a Clank backpack. Up next, the fourth game in the Sly Cooper series, Thieves in Time. There's two nods to Ratchet & Clank in this one. The first is a collectible treasure, namely the medieval Metal Man statue that's clearly Clank in medieval armor, and the second is an unlockable replacement for Sly Cooper's cane, the OmniWrench Millennium 12. What makes this familiar-looking tool all the more special is that while it's equipped, the collectible coins in the game are not only worth twice as much, but are also transformed into bolts, which is a wonderful little touch that ensured I had the wrench equipped for far longer than I'm willing to admit. Meanwhile, over in Little Big Planet 2, you can purchase some rather adorable DLC costumes to dress Sackboy up as either Ratchet or Clank. Doesn't affect the gameplay any, but it's still fun to do. Speaking of dress up, the PS3 version of Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare also had a Ratchet outfit, namely a hat. Completely pointless, sure, but tell me you wouldn't want it. There's also a parody of a Crack in Times cover, which is kinda cute, I guess. Cosmetic extras also appear in the multiplayer modes for the first two Resistance games, which is fitting given how they were also developed by Insomniac. There's three unlockable items here: the gravity boots, a mighty wrench, and a Clank backpack. Again, purely cosmetic, and since they're bright white, they'll make you stand out like a sore thumb, so probably not the best thing to wear on the battlefield. But come on, it's a Clank backpack. You know you want one. On to something a little more substantial, namely Mod Racer's Nation for the PS3. Both characters appeared in the game as pre-order bonuses, though they're available to all these days as DLC. The game itself, if you've not heard of it, is a highly customizable kart racer. It's actually really good, though I still prefer Sega All-Stars Racing. Going back a console generation, there's also Hot Shots Golf 4 for the PS2, or Everybody's Golf if you live in Europe and want a much better cover. Not as great as the Japanese one, mind, but still, better. Anyway, Ratchet's a playable character, with Clank as his caddy. They play as Team Veldon, which is a nice little reference to Ratchet's home planet, even if Team Darkstar might have been a little bit better. But you know which other playable characters appear in those games? Jak and Daxter, which leads nicely onto their franchise, in which Ratchet and Clank have made several appearances over the years. This should come as no surprise though, given that when both franchises were starting out, the two developers were actually based in the same building. Speaking of, let's clear up a commonly believed fallacy. The Ratchet & Clank games do not use the same game engine as the Jak and Daxter ones. The Ratchet & Clank engine was developed by Insomniac, but thanks to the two developers sharing technology, also made use of several renderers made by Naughty Dog, namely ones that allow them to draw the huge landscapes seen in the backgrounds of levels. That's why Naughty Dog have mentioned in the credits. Anyway, appearances. Ratchet & Clank popped up as a poster in Jak 2 and as civilians on a gun course in Jak 3, but their most significant appearance was in Jak X Combat Racing, where, provided you had a save game from Ratchet deadlocked on your PS2's memory card, Ratchet appeared as a multiplayer character. Seem a little odd? Well, it's rather fitting, since Jak was a multiplayer character in Ratchet Deadlocked. Sadly, you couldn't play as either in single player, but still, it was fun. Finally, you can obtain masks of both Ratchet and Clank in the PSP game Daxter. But let's be honest, you don't really care about any of those, do you? You just want to hear about PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, also known as PASBA or Super Smash Bros. Sony Edition, since that's basically what it is. A massive cross-franchise fighting game for Sony characters. Personally, I think the game's okay, if nothing special. It really does play similarly to Smash Bros, and I enjoy that series even while admitting I'm not very good at it. So I somewhat enjoyed Battle Royale as well, although the main difference gameplay-wise, having to build up a super move in order to defeat enemies rather than being able to do so through normal attacks, is most definitely flawed. As for Ratchet & Clank, well, their small little single-player story sees them searching for bolts in space before getting caught up in all the fighting, eventually going up against Jak and Daxter, which is appropriate, and then just going home once they beat the final boss. It's every bit as pointless and throwaway a story as you can imagine. If the player's appearance in the game was the only reason you were interested in it, then you're going to be sorely disappointed. But funnily enough, that wasn't the only PlayStation All-Stars game ever made. There was also PlayStation All-Stars Island. Never heard of it? Then you don't live in Europe, because that's the only place it was released. Thankfully. All-Stars Island was a free-to-play mobile and Android game that was heavily sponsored by Coke Zero, to the point where there's more ads to the soft drink than there are characters, and there's only 4 of those, the lead characters from Gravity Rush, Infamous, Little Big Planet, and Uncharted, all of whom are given their own endless runner minigame. And that's about it. You're not really missing out on much, America. If you're wondering how Ratchet and Clank factor into this one, then they appear as special minigames within either the Infamous or Uncharted sections respectively whenever you collect enough bottles of Coke. Ratchet's minigame has you flying around in a manner he's not really known for doing, and collecting what I think is Raritanium, while Clank's has you bouncing on platforms that are floating in midair for reasons, and is incredibly difficult to control because you have to tilt your device to basically do anything, and it's really off-putting. It's really not worth tracking the game down just for them. If you're genuinely curious though, look on YouTube for Infamous Survival and Uncharted Drake's Escape and spare yourself the gameplay experience, because it's really not a very good game. And that, as far as I'm aware, is all of Ratchet & Clank's appearances in games not their own. Feel free to let me know if there's others I've missed, and for heaven's sake, do not bother tracking these down if you're not interested in the games themselves. You shouldn't pick up a game just because someone cameos in it. Trust me on that.